DLC,
standing for downloadable content, for those who didn't know, is an umbrella term that has many connotations, one of which being questionable ethics. It of course refers to content for a video game that has to be downloaded via the internet. DLC comes in all shapes and sizes. It could be a small patch that fixes a few bugs in a game, or even a full-fledged expansion pack that brings fresh new content and a hefty memory usage to boot. However, it's a term mostly used to describe the latter, with things like map packs, skin sets, new characters, and new game modes. With this information, it becomes clear that the goal of DLC is to add or remove content from the base game it is attached to. In the early days of video games before the internet, it wasn't possible for games to receive patches and expansions because, well, there was no internet. So any changes developers wanted to make to their game had to be saved for a potential sequel or a remake. It wasn't until the internet was made a public domain in 1991 and the eventual integration between games and online services were developers able to add additional content to their games without having to republish the same game. This new innovation would go on to shape the gaming industry to what we know it as today. The first known implementation of DLC came with the game Total Annihilation, which saw a new unit added to the game every month. That was all the way back in 1997, and DLC has come a long way since then, reaching new highs and, unfortunately, even lower lows. Nowadays, additional content is very much expected if a game wishes to survive and keep its player base healthy. Online multiplayer games typically get the most expansions. However, that's not to say that story-driven games don't get DLC too. While of course DLC is a means to keep people interested in a specific game, it is equally a means to make developers more money. This is understandable in some cases, as devs will often need bigger budgets to expand their games, but in other cases, it definitely feels like some devs focus too much on making money rather than a good expansion for the player base. For every benefit DLC brings us, there are an equal number of issues they bring as well. Now, not every developer handles the inclusion of DLC the same way, as some definitely do it better than others. Let's begin with the one that affects gameplay the most: patches. Patches are updates made to a game that try to smoothen out the experience for the player. Sometimes games will launch with bugs and issues that the developers are not made aware of before the launch of the game, or just can't be bothered to fix them at launch. Small tweaks like these help make the experience of a game better for the player, whether that be through immersion, better gameplay, or making the experience less difficult and balanced. These small updates can help change the perception people have of a game. Although a game at first may seem unplayable and at times broken, with time these patches can help rebuild that relationship between the game and the gamer. However, ever since patches have become available, it seems like some developers take this as a way to be less careful and precise when making a game, as they seem to have this idea that they have room to make mistakes, and any mistakes they make can just be rectified at a later date once everyone has already bought their game. This cushion of protection means some developers can take advantage of this, and do take advantage of this, leaving their games half finished and buggy as fuck. This can be an extremely frustrating experience to sit through, especially if you've been waiting on a game release for a long time, only to be disappointed with a poorly optimized, bug-ridden mess. Although some games have dedicated developers who genuinely want their player base to have a fun experience, some developers on the other side of the spectrum who don't really give a shit can take forever to implement patches. There are many big names in the video game industry who are notorious for this, which I'm pretty sure we are all familiar with. Problems like this can kill a game in a matter of months, even weeks after they have launched, if devs decide to send a game out of the door before it's finished. Unfortunately, nowadays, unfinished games are everywhere and far too frequent. Although these fixes mean games released with errors can be made better eventually, it still means players have to wait a potentially extended amount of time to play a game in a finished state despite already paying for it. Waiting isn't something a lot of gamers like to do. Making them wait is just a recipe for disaster.
That's a good joke, but that's it.
As well as this kind of patch, there is another type that is found in PvP type games. These patches attempt to balance gameplay, making the experience fair between all players. This typically happens by implementing nerfs, buffs, or just simply removing something too broken from the game entirely. These types of updates can drastically change the gameplay of anything from a specific weapon, ability, or character, leaving them less or more powerful than they were before the patch was brought to the game. Having the ability to overhaul, say for instance, a weapon perhaps, making it less powerful powerful than before, can push players to change it up and vary their gameplay instead of sticking to the one overpowered gun. COD players are far too familiar with this, as every new COD release seems to suffer from this problem each year. So the fact that devs can see this and tune down weapons that need it and tune up others means players will have to adapt. It's also quite entertaining to watch people baby rage over the fact that the only weapon they use in the game got a nerf, despite there being countless other weapons in the game. Patches attempt to keep everything in line and ensure that there are no entities in these games that are too weak or too powerful. I say attempt because it's impossible to keep everything equally balanced in these games. No matter how hard developers try to balance everything, there will always be weapons, characters and abilities that are just too good to nerf entirely. However, sometimes devs can take these patches to the extreme and completely destroy the thing they were trying to nerf. It's pretty jarring seeing how different some of these weapons or characters become after patches. In fact, rather than just do typical stat changes that most patches do, like lowering or upping damage, some patches totally rework something from the ground up, which is very prominent in game genres such as MOBAs and hero shooters. Due to these factors, patches are arguably the most important kind of DLC there is, as they have the power to make the quality of a game even better than before, and also have the ability to completely change elements within a game, which some people may love and others may hate. Now let's move on to the more popular form of DLC. Expansions. The term expansion, like DLC, is an umbrella term that holds a lot of subcategories in it. These aim to add additional content to an already finished game post-launch in order to keep people invested in the game they are playing. This, as I mentioned earlier, can be done through a number of ways: story expansions, map packs, skins, new characters, pretty much anything that helps build upon the experience of the base game. Many games nowadays are expected to be supported for months, even years after their releases, to ensure they generate more money. I mean, keep their fans happy. Haha. That's what I meant to say. People will obviously begin to lose interest in a game, playing the same maps or replaying the same story over and over again. Expansions help dilute that pool, with more experiences for the player to try out and get invested in. Some games don't even need expansions, but it can't be denied that this is a very risky move, as people nowadays often demand that there be additional content shipped with games. Some games deliver a fulfilling and replayable experience that leaves a lasting impact on the player, and others definitely need that additional content. Some games bless us with free updates, allowing players to play the new content without having to spend a penny. This is very prominent once again in hero shooters and MOBAs, as new characters are often added in large updates, giving them to the player for free. These are few and far between, however, as often large expansions require additional payments to get. A lot of these are pretty pricey, which sometimes you can let slide, as the expansion itself is a great addition, and other times they can be complete wastes of money. It's very frustrating seeing how expensive some of these DLC packs are, despite consumers paying full price for a lot of these games. Despite things like season passes existing, which offer the player a cheaper price for all DLC if they buy them in bulk rather than individually, questions still began to rise as to whether many of these prices were justified. It's understandable why devs charge for DLC. They obviously need the additional budget, as games can't be made for free, no matter how much we wish they were. But I mean, come on, have you seen some of these prices? It's even more shocking when you realise it's mostly AAA developers who are behind a lot of these overpriced DLCs. Some of these skin packs, not even fully fledged expansions, just skin packs, cosmetics, are almost worth a quarter of the full game. How does that work? Who makes these prices up? The ability to change your clothes and/or guns a different colour warrants that price tag? Really? Some developers have come to realise that people are not really fans of the overpriced DLC scene. This has led to the next phase of season passes, now commonly referred to as battle passes. This was arguably made popular by Fortnite when it released its Battle Royale game mode. The game was released for free, and so to make money, Epic Games would charge players if they wanted new skins and emotes to use in-game.
And I'm happy to be in Fortnite. So,
For me, in this sense, the devs charging players for cosmetics rather than the base game is understandable, as it's not like these skins are required to play the game to its fullest. It becomes a little more questionable when other games adopted this same battle pass technique, although there is a plus side to this, as now many no longer charge players to play additional maps and game modes. It still feels a little wrong, considering most of these games were full price at launch. In addition to this, despite DLC being a system that allows additional content to be released with a full-fledged game, this does not stop some developers developers making a game with missing content only to add it in later as DLC. This is similar to how some devs abuse patches, as in our fairly recent history of the video game industry, we are seeing games that do not nearly have as much content as games in our past have had. That is because greedy companies take things out of these games and make it part of DLC that the player then has to buy if they want to play it. It's crazy to think that these companies are doing this, but it can't be denied that it is a very effective way of making fat stacks. Monetizing cosmetics is nothing new, as only recently games have stopped using loot boxes to give players cosmetics, as it became clear that players were not being rewarded for skill and dedication, and rather had to rely on luck to get the things they wanted. A promise of DLC is not always positive, however, especially when the base game is not nearly sufficient enough with content. There are plenty of games that feel empty at launch, that then fill their games with DLC down the line, which although may sound good, it means players have to potentially wait a long time for the games they play to feel satisfied with the content finally available to them that should have launched with the game at the beginning. Making players wait and in some cases pay an extra hefty amount of money just to have a full game experience is inexcusable, and it's shocking to see that some of the most successful and respected video game developers are doing this. DLC, arguably nowadays, stirs up more controversy than ever. Back in the day, DLCs were a nice little bonus people could buy if they so pleased, but usually these DLCs were attached to fully fledged and finished games, so it never felt like a con to pay that little bit extra. This I feel definitely links to the decline of standards overall in gaming. Everyone has noticed a decline in quality of video games in the past 10 years or so. Back in the day, it was easy to see the passion and love developers had for their creations, but now, many of those same creators seem to churn out games that lack even half the quality of those gems of the past, and tarnish their reputation with cheap money-making tactics. This, unfortunately, is the world we're in now though. Integrity has gone out the window for most of these conglomerates, who only have dollar signs on their mind.
We've got to have money.